some people have written to us and they said, look, you're not going to have a policeman with a gun knocking on your door accompanied by a doctor with a syringe. They haven't got the resources to do that. How actually could they enforce it if they wanted to? How could it happen? What would be the sanctions which they have?
Well, the French government released or circulated to the heads of departments an internal document of 19 pages which outlined quite clearly their method. And this is what I assume is happening in every country. They're going to set up vaccine centres that are outside hospitals and GPs. Some of these are going to be secure. People are going to be told to go there at first of their own free will, and then they're going to receive calls, whatever, telling them to appear at a certain time. And those people who do not come are going to eventually be collected and forced to go there.
Do the resources exist to actually do that? Because you're talking about transporting and enforcing and rounding up and making contact with hundreds of thousands of people, and possibly many more than that.
Absolutely. If so many people refuse, it will be impossible. But they are assuming that the vast majority of people will either go of their free will, or when they get the call from, say, a police authority telling them to appear, or the notification, they will go reluctantly, but they will still obey that call. And the number of people who will actually refuse to go and stay at home when they're informed it's a criminal offence not to go will be very small, and it will be a criminal offence not to go. However, if it turns out that hundreds of thousands of millions refuse to go, then they cannot carry it through. And that's why it's important for every single person to say no and not to go along with it.
This is Bill Ryan from Project Camelot, and I'm here in Vienna on the 8th of September 2009. I happen to be in Vienna because I've just returned from a conference in Poland, and I have just met Jane Burgermeister, who up until now has been a figure shrouded in mystery. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you visually to the world here by being the first person in the internet community to have made a trail to find out, and here I'm going to make a joke, whether you really exist or not, and I can demonstrate to everyone that you truly do. What, may I ask, Jane, was your response when you realised that you had an opportunity to basically to give a message to the world on camera, which is what I want to support you in being able to do?
Well, thank you, Bill, for, as I say, taking the trouble to come all the way here. And it's a bit off the beaten track here in Vienna. It is, however, a significant place, as it turns out. It is the place where Baxter contaminated 72 kilos of vaccine material with the live bird flu, and so nearly triggered a global pandemic just a few months ago in February. This attempt to trigger a pandemic failed because of the alertness of people in the Czech Republic who detected it in a laboratory in biotest. However, it has now turned out that Baxter still has at least a large amount of that 72 kilos of bird flu, and we're coming to a point where we have only perhaps a few weeks until the government here in Austria and other governments around the world intend to start injecting people with so-called swine flu vaccine material, which we have every reason to fear is going to be a big hazard to our health, and has been designed to be a hazard to our health, even if it isn't contaminated with the live bird flu virus, as it might well be. So my message that I want to give to people, if I can give any message, is that time is running short, that we all of us now have to recognize the scale of the threat and danger to us individually and collectively, and we need to take steps and organize to stop this mass vaccination program as soon as possible.
And as we were discussing when we were just chatting before we started this video interview, you feel a tremendous sense of urgency, don't you? This is driving you right now.
Well, unfortunately, we have seen how, in spite of mounting and growing protests in the USA and now in Europe, the latest polls show that 29% of the Germans are categorically going to refuse the swine flu vaccine. In spite of all that, the governments are pressing ahead relentlessly, who is pushing with tremendous determination this unwanted, unnecessary and dangerous program on us. And it's coming in just a few weeks.
What's interesting to me is that we, like you, get reports from all over the world, and it seems that governments in every first world nation, and maybe other nations too, seem to be preparing in almost like marching in step with this thing. This is coordinated, isn't it?
Absolutely, and if you look at the legal framework, they are all following the same legal framework, and it's the International Health Regulations of 2005, which give WHO, the World Health Organization based in Geneva, the power to control how governments respond to this pandemic, which WHO has itself declared. And every country has a more or less identical pandemic plan, which hands power over to the World Health Organization, which allows the World Health Organization to take over the police and the health forces. And every country will set up a crisis committee, which will determine, what vaccine centers are established, what groups are going to be targeted for vaccination, and so on. And that is the reason why it's so coordinated and synchronized, because there is a single body behind it, and this is the World Health Organization, the UN, and the people who back that, the banking cartel and family dynasty, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds.
Now, let's just back up a moment here, and for those people watching this video who don't know who you are and why we should be talking here in Vienna, can you just give a little bit of your background? The things that you shared with me personally, for instance, I didn't even know that you were at university in Edinburgh, how long you've been in Vienna, what you're doing here, and just a little bit of a bio. How did you get to this place? Sometimes you must wake up in the morning asking yourself the same question. How did you get here?
Well, my dad is Austrian and my mother is from Ireland, and I was born in Switzerland. And I went to Edinburgh University, where I did English literature and language and a bit of philosophy and so on. And I came to Austria in the year 2000, and I started working here as a medical journal for or as an editor for a medical journal specializing in diabetes. And I quit that of my own free will and started writing for medical wires, Reuters Health, for the British Medical Journal, The Scientist, Nature, and so on. And so I acquired an understanding of the medical field and how to do research in this area. And then I eventually moved into renewable energy because I believe that's a tremendous potential for humanity. Until one day, this winter, a neighbour showed me the report in a local newspaper saying that Baxter had contaminated this vaccine material and 36 people had to go to hospital to be treated preventatively for the bird flu. And then, of course, I understood this was a tremendous threat, and that because biosafety level 3 regulations are in place in these sort of facilities, it can't have been an accident.
So your experience gained as a medical journalist immediately helped you to realise that something very unusual and important had happened here, is that right?
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. And I also felt confident about doing the research into it and filing charges, which I did eventually. Because of that background, I had done quite a lot of work in that field, so I felt confident I could handle it.
Okay, now, something which I do want to ask you is that many people have understandably asked the question, who is this woman and where does she come from out of nowhere? And I can resonate with that, because people say that about us, and people feel sometimes an understandable sense of territoriality. It's like, wait a minute, this is my area, or wait a minute, I've been researching this for 20 years, or where's this newcomer come from? Now, were you conscious of the fact that when you started to write about this stuff, people would be saying, who is this person? We've never heard her name before.
I have to be honest and say my concern was to try and stop and publicize what I saw as a big crime and threat. I was very concerned that there was no publicity, no action being taken by the Austrian government, and that Baxter could release this material the day after.
And it should have been news headlines all over the world.
Absolutely.
It was underwhelming, wasn't it?
It was underwhelming, and that created the risk that they were just going to repeat the same maneuver, and a pandemic was going to be ignited. And because I myself had come to realize that the media was totally controlled through my own experiences working in the media, I didn't make too much effort in trying to alert the newspapers. I sent a story or the pitch to the BMJ. The editor wasn't interested. I wasn't too surprised.
That's the British Medical Journal.
Yes, for which I have worked. The Lancet wasn't interested. I sent it to the Austrian papers, no response. Profil, an Austrian magazine, actually wrote an article whitewashing Baxter, in spite of all my information. And so, as an individual, I saw very few opportunities for halting this mechanism or truck that seemed to be hurtling towards, unleashing a pandemic. So I filed criminal charges in the hope of putting a spoke in the wheel and forcing an investigation. I'd never done that before. And
did you have professional help in doing that? Because I wouldn't know how to start filing charges against anybody.
Yes, to be honest, a lawyer did tell me I had to file criminal charges and where to go, and sort of the basic laws. So I did get that advice. On my mother's side of the family, there were some lawyers, and so my mum too was very good at kind of legal reasoning and stuff like that. And so I decided to give it a shot. I'd never done it before, but I thought I might as well give it a try. The evidence is there, it's just a question of laying it out clearly. So that's what I did, and the police did start investigating.
Is it the police here in Vienna?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And my understanding is that 3 police forces are investigating: the police in Vienna, the police in Korneuburg, and the Unit for Protection of the Constitution and Fighting Terrorism was also investigating, and I know that for sure because I was summoned there for an interview. However, what has alarmed me is the fact that nothing has happened. The government is continuing to press ahead with its program of mass vaccination with these Baxter vaccines. There are no security checks in place to ensure that the material isn't contaminated. The situation is such that I might as well never have filed the charges. And last week, the head of the Unit for Protecting the Constitution and Fighting Terrorism was forced to resign, it seems, and replaced by somebody who appears to be much more loyal to the powers that want this vaccination program to go ahead. The same is true of the Austrian criminal police. The head was replaced by somebody who also has a track record of working for these so-called New World Order corporations. And so I increasingly feel these structures in government are not going to be effective in stopping and halting this danger, and that's why we have to now move towards organized civilian resistance to the vaccines.
But you must be encouraged, because parallel with your metaphorically waking up that morning to realize that, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? There's something happening that shouldn't be. A lot of other people all over the world have been becoming very aware of this and very active. You must be feeling heartened by that, yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, the response has been amazing and exponential. It's just every day it's amazing to see the progress, and today I heard that the Greek police are going to refuse and have officially refused to take the vaccine, which is quite a significant milestone. This is the police force which the government will rely on to force the Greeks to take a vaccine, because according to polls the Greeks do not want to take the vaccine, so eventually it'll come down to the government having to either force them or try and frighten them into taking it by triggering a pandemic, and that's just one example. Germany, there's enormous resistance, and so is there in France, not to mention the USA, and increasingly in the UK. Unfortunately, my language skills are limited. I don't speak Spanish or any other language, so I'm only able to track and monitor what's happening in the countries where I speak a bit of the language, which is France, Germany, and English-speaking countries.
I just came back from Poland, where I gave a talk about a whole bunch of stuff, including this, to a large number of very awake and aware and concerned people. And I was heartened because, maybe like yourself, I didn't know anything about what was happening in Poland. People are very, very concerned. They're very aware that there's a problem here. It's being discussed a lot, and just now I showed you a document that had been prepared by a Polish, a very highly respected Polish medic, saying that this is completely out of order, it shouldn't be happening, the vaccines are likely to be contaminated, the whole thing is spurious. And there's evidence that this wave is sort of growing all over the world, and some of this has been caused by your own civilian initiative. Now, just to back up a little bit, somewhere down the line, and this may seem like quite a long time ago now, you lost your job, probably because of this, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I mean, to be honest, I can't even remember now when it was, but I think it was the end of June or the beginning of July. I was unceremoniously informed that I was not, the reports that I had been scheduled to write were not required, and since I'd been working there for almost 2 years without any complaint, and no reason was given, it was clear to me that this was connected with the fact that I had filed these criminal charges. And I also went to the US Embassy in Vienna and filed charges with the FBI.